The grandfather clock in the hallway didn't just tell time, it breathed. Tick-tock. To anyone else, it was just background noise, a rhythmic monotony that faded into the woodwork. But to Jimmy, it was a heartbeat. It was the only other heartbeat in the sprawling, Victorian-era house that sat atop the hill on Elm Street. Jimmy sat in his leather armchair, the one with the cracked armrest where his left elbow had rested for 30 years. At 81, his body had become a traitor. His knees groaned like rusted hinges when it rained, and his hands, once steady enough to manipulate hairsprings the width of a human eyelash, now carried a subtle, frustrating tremor. But his eyes were clear, a piercing, icy blue that had seen decades of intricate machinery examining the world through a lope. He looked around the living room. Dust motes danced in the shaft of afternoon sunlight cutting through the heavy velvet drapes. The house was too big. He knew that. 4 bedrooms, a formal dining room, a library filled with books he had read a dozen times, and a workshop in the back where his tools lay dormant, covered in white sheets like ghosts of his past profession. It was a valuable property. In this market, with the city expanding outward, developers were circling the neighborhood like sharks smelling blood in the water. Jimmy had received letters, dozens of them, offering cash, quick closings, and peace of mind. He burned them in the fireplace during the winter. This house wasn't an asset, it was a memory box. It was where his wife Eleanor had planted the hydrangeas. It was where his son Mark had learned to walk. Mark, Jimmy whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He hadn't seen Mark in 6 months. A phone call here and there, usually brief, usually ending with a request for a small loan to tide him over until a big deal went through. Mark was 45, a man who chased get-rich-quick schemes with the energy of a teenager, but the wisdom of a gnat. Jimmy reached for his tea, the china cup rattling slightly against the saucer. He steadied it with both hands. He missed Sarah. His granddaughter was the only bright spark in the fading light of his life. She was away at university, studying architecture. She called every Sunday, without fail. But this week, she hadn't. Mark had told him she was too busy with exams, and shouldn't be disturbed. Jimmy respected education, so he didn't call. But the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway shattered the afternoon stillness. Jimmy frowned. He wasn't expecting a delivery. He pushed himself up from the chair, grabbing his cane, a polished piece of oak he'd carved himself. He walked slowly to the window, parting the curtain with a trembling finger. A sleek, black SUV was parked haphazardly near the rose bushes. It was a rental, he could tell by the barcode sticker on the side window. The doors opened. First came Mark. He looked disheveled despite the expensive suit. His tie was loose, his hair thinning, his face carrying the puffy redness of someone who drank too much wine the night before. Then came Brenda. Jimmy felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the drafty windows. Brenda, his daughter-in-law. She was a woman who smiled with her mouth but never her eyes. She wore oversized sunglasses and was currently tapping furiously on her phone, ignoring the majestic oak tree she was standing under. What are they doing here? Jimmy muttered to himself. He didn't move to the door immediately. He watched as Mark opened the trunk and pulled out 2 large suitcases. Panic, sharp and sudden, spiked in Jimmy's chest. They weren't just visiting, they were staying. He heard the heavy brass knocker slam against the wood. Bang, bang. Impatient, entitled. Jimmy took a deep breath, composing his face. He was a watchmaker. He knew how to hide the inner workings behind a comm dial. He walked to the door and opened it. "Dad," Mark boomed, his voice too loud, too cheerful. He dropped the suitcases and opened his arms, engulfing Jimmy in a hug that smelled of stale cologne and stress. "It's a surprise!" Jimmy stood stiffly, patting Mark's back awkwardly. "Mark, Brenda, I wasn't expecting you." Brenda stepped forward, lowering her sunglasses. Her eyes scanned the hallway, not looking at Jimmy, but looking at the things inside the house. The grandfather clock, the crystal chandelier, the Persian rug, calculating, assessing. "Oh, Jimmy, don't be silly," Brenda said, her voice a high-pitched coo that grated on his ears. "We couldn't let you stay in this big, old drafty mausoleum all by yourself anymore. We've been so worried." "Worried?" Jimmy asked, stepping back to let them in. "I'm fine. I just had my checkup last week. Evan said I'm as healthy as a horse, considering the mileage. Dr. Evans is a dinosaur." Mark scoffed, kicking the door shut behind him. "Dad, look at you. You're shaking. You're thin. And this place," Mark gestured vaguely at the immaculate hallway. "It's too much for one man. It's dangerous. I manage," Jimmy said firmly. "Why do you have suitcases?" Mark and Brenda exchanged a look Jimmy had seen before. It was the look of 2 conspirators who had rehearsed a script. "Well," Mark started, rubbing the back of his neck. Things have been tricky. The market, you know. The business needs a little restructuring. We thought, why pay rent on our apartment in the city when we can come here, help you out, fix up the place, and spend some quality family time together? Fix up the place. Jimmy tightened his grip on his cane. The place is fine. It needs updating? Dad. Brenda chimed in, walking past him into the living room. She ran a finger over the mantelpiece. It smells like old paper and mothballs. It's depressing. It smells like home, Jimmy corrected her, his voice low. We're doing this for you, Jimmy, Brenda said, turning to face him, a pitying smile plastered on her face. We're going to take care of everything. You won't have to lift a finger. Jimmy looked at his son. Mark wouldn't meet his eyes. He was looking at the floor, shifting his weight. How long? Jimmy asked. Just for a while. Mark mumbled. Until we get things sorted. Plus, we need to talk about the future, Dad. Your future. The grandfather clock chimed the hour. Bong. 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 4 o'clock. Usually at 4 o'clock, Jimmy had his tea and read the newspaper. Today, his sanctuary had been breached. As he watched his son lug the heavy suitcases up the stairs, scratching the banister in the process, Jimmy felt a gear slip in the mechanism of his life. They weren't here to help him. He didn't know exactly what they wanted yet, but he knew one thing: the wolves were inside the house. Dinner was an ordeal. Jimmy usually ate simply: grilled fish, steamed vegetables, a slice of bread he cooked for himself, moving around the kitchen with a slow, practiced rhythm. Tonight, Brenda had insisted on taking over. The result was a chaotic mess of pots and pans clattering, the smell of burnt garlic filling the air, and a meal that was somehow both greasy and cold. They sat at the formal dining table, a piece of mahogany furniture that seated 12, which only emphasized the distance between them. Jimmy sat at the head, Mark to his right, Brenda to his left. This house really is a gold mine, Brenda said between bites, her fork scraping loudly against Eleanor's fine china. I looked up the comps on Zillow. The Henderson place down the street, the one on the smaller lot. It went for nearly $2 million last month. Jimmy carefully cut a piece of potato. The Henderson place was gutted. They tore out the original molding. It has no soul. Saul doesn't pay the bills. Jimmy. Brenda chuckled, reaching for the wine bottle. They had brought 3 bottles. They were already on the second. And think of the maintenance. The heating bill alone must be astronomical. I have a pension, Jimmy said. And savings, I manage, but for how long? Mark interjected, leaning forward. His face was flushed. Dade, look, we need to be realistic. You had that fall last winter. I slipped on ice, Jimmy said sharply. I didn't break anything. I was up in 10 seconds. But next time you might not get up, Mark said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. We worry about you constantly. Sarah worries about you? Jimmy paused. Sarah. You told me she was busy with exams. She is, Brenda said quickly. But she calls us, crying. She's terrified you're going to fall down these stairs and lie there for days before anyone finds you. Do you want that on her conscience? Do you want your granddaughter failing her classes because she's so stressed about you? It was a low blow, a precise strike at his weakest point. Jimmy set his fork down. The appetite he barely had was gone. I don't want Sarah to worry. Exactly, Mark said, seizing the opening. That's why we looked into options. Better options. Mark reached under the table and pulled out a glossy brochure. He slid it across the mahogany surface. It hit Jimmy's placemat with a soft thud. Saint Estevienne Premier Assisted Living. The cover showed smiling elderly people playing chess in a sunlit room. It looked like a hotel. I don't need assisted living, Jimmy said, pushing the brochure back. I am not an invalid. It's not for invalids, Dad. Mark insisted. It's a community. You'd have friends. Activities. 3 hot meals prepared by chefs. No stairs. No leaking roofs. Medical staff on call 24/7. And the best part, Brenda added, her eyes gleaming, is that we can finance it easily. We sell this place. The market is at a peak. Jimmy, it's not going to last. And the money covers your care for the rest of your life. You'd be living like a king. And the rest of the money? Jimmy asked softly. Mark blinked. Well, obviously there would be a surplus. Significant surplus. We would manage that for you. Invest it. Ensure Sarah's tuition is covered. Secure the family legacy. I see, Jimmy said. He looked at the brochure again. He noticed something. The address. It was in the next county, nearly an hour away. Far from his friends. Far from his doctors. Far from the library he loved. I've heard of Sunset Haven, Jimmy said. He kept his voice neutral. I heard they had some regulatory issues last year. Fake news? Mark waved his hand dismissively. Competitors trying to bring them down. We toured it ourselves, Dad. It's a paradise. Truly. We just want what's best for you, Brenda said, reaching out to cover Jimmy's hand with hers. Her hand was cold, her nails sharp. We can't sleep at night thinking of you here, all alone in this ghost house. Ghost house, Jimmy repeated. This is where your mother died. Mark, exactly. Mark said, his voice hard. It's full of sad memories. It's time to move on. Start a new chapter. Jimmy pulled his hand away from Brenda's. I am not selling the house. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Mark's jaw tightened. Brenda's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pursed annoyance. You're being stubborn. Mark snapped. You're not thinking clearly. This is exactly what Dr. Evans warned us about. Cognitive rigidity? Dr. Evans never said that, Jimmy said. I see him. You don't? Maybe you just don't remember him saying it. Brenda suggested, her voice dipping into a patronizing, sweet tone again. Memory is a tricky thing, Jimmy. Just this morning, Mark said you left the stove on. I did not, Jimmy said, outraged. I haven't cooked since breakfast, and I had cereal. See, Mark threw his hands up. You don't even remember using the stove. Dad, the gas was on. I turned it off when we walked in. You could have blown the whole place up. Jimmy stared at him. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he had not touched the stove. He was meticulous. He checked the dials 3 times before leaving the kitchen. It was a habit from 40 years of handling volatile cleaning fluids for watch parts. He never made mistakes like that. They were gaslighting him. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. They were trying to make him doubt his own mind. I am tired, Jimmy said, standing up. His legs felt shaky, but he forced them to hold his weight. I am going to bed. Think about the brochure, Dad! Mark called after him. Just think about it. Don't be selfish. Selfish. The man who had paid for Mark's private school, his first failed business, his second failed business, his wedding, his divorce, and his second wedding. Jimmy walked to the hallway, the sound of his cane tapping against the floor the only response he gave. As he climbed the stairs, he heard the clink of the wine bottle against a glass. They were celebrating. They thought they had planted the seed. They didn't realize they had just watered the weeds of his suspicion. The house was old, and like many old things, it had secrets. One of those secrets was the ventilation system. The heavy brass vents in the floor connected the rooms in a way that carried sound with remarkable clarity, especially at night when the world outside was silent. Jimmy's bedroom was directly above the study. He had converted the study into a guest room for Mark and Brenda, but they were currently in the living room, which shared a vent duct with his bedroom. It was 2:00 a.m. Jimmy lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The interaction at dinner had unsettled him deeply. The accusation about the stove, it was clumsy but dangerous. If they could convince a doctor he was a danger to himself, they could take power of attorney. He knew the law. He had seen it happen to his friend Arthur 3 years ago. He heard a noise below, a thud, then laughter. He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He moved silently across the room to the corner where the floor vent sat. He had placed a rug over it to stop the draft, but he pulled the rug back now. The voices drifted up, slightly tinny but distinct. Can't believe he bought the stove thing? Mark's voice. He sounded drunk. He looked like he was about to cry. His brittle. Brenda's voice replied. His holding on, but he's weak. Did you see his hands shaking? It won't take much, Mark. I hate being here. Mark groaned. This place smells like old people. And the Wi-Fi is garbage. Stop whining, Brenda snapped. Keep your eyes on the prize. 2 million. Mark. Minimum. Probably 2.5 if we stage it right. That clears the debt with the investors, pays off the credit cards, and leaves us with over $1 million to play with. Jimmy felt his heart hammer against his ribs. Debt with investors. So that was it. Mark was in trouble again. What about the home? Mark asked. Sunset Haven isn't cheap. Brenda laughed. It was a cruel, dry sound. Mark, you idiot. We aren't putting him in Sunset Haven. That brochure was just a prop. I printed it off the internet and photoshopped the logo. Sunset Haven costs $8,000 a month. We can't afford that. So where does he go? There's a state facility in the city. Shady Pines or something. It's subsidized. They take his pension checks, and that's it. We keep the house money. Jimmy clamped a hand over his mouth to stifle a gasp. A state facility. He knew the ones she meant. Overcrowded, understaffed, smelling of urine and despair. Warehouses for the forgotten. Is it bad? Mark asked. There was a hesitation in his voice, a tiny sliver of guilt. Who cares? Brenda dismissed him. He won't know the difference. In 6 months, he'll be so pumped, full of sedatives, he won't know what day it is. That's standard protocol in those places. It's a mercy, really. And Sarah, Mark asked. What if she visits? She won't, Brenda said confidently. I told her that her grandfather has developed sudden onset dementia and has become violent. I told her the doctors recommended isolation for a few months while they adjust his meds. She's scared. Mark, she won't come near him. By the time she realizes what's happened, the house will be sold, the money will be offshore, and Jimmy will be too far gone to tell her the truth. Jimmy felt tears prick his eyes. Not for himself, but for the betrayal of Sarah. They were poisoning his relationship with the only person he loved, using lies to keep her away. You're a genius, babe, Mark said, the guilt apparently gone. So, what's the timeline? We need to break him, Brenda said coldly, fast. The investors gave you 30 days, right? We need power of attorney by next week. We need to ramp up the gaslighting. Move his things. Hide his medication. Maybe accidentally leave a window open so he gets a chill. If he gets sick, it's easier to declare him incompetent. 30 days, Mark muttered. Okay. Tomorrow we start phase 2. I'll mess with his tools in the workshop. If he can't fix his watches, he'll feel useless. That's his whole identity. Perfect, Brenda said. Now, pour me another drink. To the watchmaker's retirement fund, glasses clinked. Upstairs, Jimmy Sterling sat in the dark, his body trembling. But it wasn't the tremor of age anymore. It was the vibration of a machine coming to life. They wanted to break him. They wanted to take his home, his dignity, and his granddaughter. They thought he was just a confused old man, a broken cog to be tossed in the scrap heap. They had forgotten who he was. He was a master watchmaker. He understood how complex systems worked. He knew that the smallest grain of sand, placed in exactly the right gear, could bring the entire machine grinding to a halt. He wiped the tears from his face. His hand was no longer shaking. 30 days, he whispered to the darkness. You have 30 days. He stood up and walked to his desk. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a fresh notebook and a fountain pen. He sat down and wrote the date at the top of the page. Then he wrote a single line, project dismantle. The following morning, the war began. It wasn't fought with guns or shouting matches. It was fought with misplaced keys, rearranged furniture, and gaslighting so thick it choked the air like smog. Jimmy woke at 1600 a.m., as he always did. But when he reached for his glasses on the bedside table, they weren't there. He patted the mahogany surface, his heart giving a small, anxious flutter before he remembered Project Dismantle. He didn't panic. He sat up, took a deep breath, and felt the floor with his toes. He walked to the bathroom, squinting through the blur. There, perched precariously on the edge of the sink, were his glasses. Sloppy. Jimmy whispered. He put them on, the world snapping back into focus. He had never left his glasses in the bathroom in 81 years. Brenda had moved them. She wanted him to feel disoriented from the moment he woke up. He went downstairs. The kitchen was already a scene of orchestrated chaos. Mark was there, leaning against the counter, drinking Jimmy's expensive coffee from a chipped mug. Morning, Dad, Mark said, his voice laced with mock concern. You were sleepwalking again last night. That Jimmy paused in the doorway. Sleepwalking? Yeah, I found you in the hallway at 300 a.m. You were talking to Mom. To the wall. Mark shook his head sadly. I had to guide you back to bed. You don't remember. Jimmy remembered perfectly well. He had been listening to their conversation through the vent until 20:30 a.m. Then he had slept soundly. He looked at Mark's face, the slight twitch in his left eye, the way he couldn't hold eye contact. Mark was a terrible liar. He lacked the discipline of a craftsman. I don't remember. Jimmy stammered, letting his shoulders slump. He made his hand tremble as he reached for the kettle. I thought I was dreaming. It's getting worse, Dad, Mark sighed. Brenda is really worried. She thinks maybe the house is confusing you. Too many rooms. Too many shadows. Maybe. Jimmy murmured, maybe you're right. He saw a flicker of surprise in Mark's eyes. They had expected resistance. Capitulation was suspicious, but it was also what they desperately wanted, so they accepted it. After breakfast, Jimmy retreated to his workshop. This was his sanctuary. The room smelled of oil, brass, and patience. Rows of tools lay on the workbench, tweezers, screwdrivers, loops. But something was wrong. Jimmy stood in the doorway, scanning the bench. To an untrained eye, it looked normal, but Jimmy knew every millimeter of this surface. The precision lathe was slightly askew. The jar of escapement files had been moved 3 inches to the left. And right in the center, his prize project, a 19th-century Breguet pocket watch he was restoring, lay disassembled. But not carefully disassembled. The mainspring barrel was forced open. The delicate hairspring, thin as a breath, was bent, twisted like a crushed spider leg. Rage, hot and white, flared in Jimmy's chest. That spring was irreplaceable. Mark had come in here fumbling with his clumsy, greedy hands and destroyed a piece of history just to make Jimmy feel incompetent. Dad. Brenda's voice came from the hallway. Jimmy took a second to compose himself. He swallowed the rage. He transformed it into fuel. He hunched his posture. He widened his eyes to mimic panic. "My watch!" Jimmy cried out, his voice shaking. "Brenda!" "Look, I broke it." Brenda appeared, holding a basket of laundry. She looked at the ruined mechanism and smirked, a quick flash of malice before her face settled into pity.
"Oh, Jimmy," she cooed.
"Did you try to fix it again? Mark told you that your hands aren't steady enough anymore." "I didn't mean to!" Jimmy wailed, playing the part. "I don't remember doing this. It's ruined." It's okay," Brenda said, stepping into the room, a place she was usually forbidden to enter. "It's just a watch. Maybe it's time to pack these tools away." "They're just frustrating you."
"You don't need this stress. Pack them away."
Jimmy looked at her, eyes wide. "For your own good," she said. "We can turn this room into a nice TV room for you. Somewhere safe." Jimmy nodded slowly, looking at the broken spring. Maybe you're right. I'm useless." "You're not useless. You're just tired," Brenda said. "Why don't you go take a nap? Mark and I will clean this up." Jimmy left the room. As he walked down the hall, he heard the sound of his expensive Swiss tools being swept carelessly into a cardboard box. Clatter. Crash. He went to his bedroom, but he didn't nap. He reached into the back of his closet, inside the pocket of an old trench coat. He pulled out a small device. It was a digital voice recorder he used to dictate repair notes. It had a 30-hour battery life and was voice-activated. He waited until he heard Mark and Brenda arguing in the kitchen downstairs. He moved silently to the landing. He slipped the recorder behind the decorative vase on the hallway table, the central point of the house. If they were going to destroy his life, he was going to document every second of it. 3 days later, the opportunity arrived. "We're going to meet some friends for dinner," Mark announced, adjusting his tie in the mirror. He looked manic. "We'll be back late. There's soup in the fridge. Don't use the stove. Just the microwave." "Okay," Jimmy said, sitting in his armchair, staring blankly at the TV. "Heave fun?" "Don't open the door for anyone," Brenda added, spraying a cloud of perfume that made Jimmy cough. "And don't leave the house. It's gonna rain." They left. The heavy door slammed shut. The SUV engine roared to life and faded down the driveway. Jimmy waited 5 minutes. Then he moved with a speed that would have terrified his son. He went to his bedroom and changed into a crisp suit he had hidden in a garment bag at the back of his wardrobe. He grabbed his cane, not the simple wooden one he used around them, but a sturdy, hollowed-out cane with a silver handle. He unscrewed the handle. Inside were rolled-up documents, the deed to the house, his will, and a bank ledger. He walked to the landline phone. He didn't call a taxi. Mark would see the charge on the bill. He called a number he had memorized 40 years ago. City cab. Send a car to 42 Elm. Cash payment. No records. 20 minutes later, Jimmy was sitting in the back of a yellow cab, watching the city blur by. The driver, a young man with headphones, didn't look twice at him. To the world, he was just another old man. "Drop me at the corner of 5th and Main," Jimmy said. He walked the last block to a nondescript brick building. Harrison and Associates, attorneys at law. Robert Harrison was waiting in the lobby. He was 75, a man with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes like flint. He and Jimmy had served in the Navy together. Robert was the only person who knew the true extent of Jimmy's finances. "Jimmy," Robert said, gripping his hand, "you look like hell." "I'm undercover." Jimmy smiled thinly. "Let's go upstairs. We don't have much time." In the leather-bound sanctuary of Robert's office, Jimmy laid everything out. The broken watch, the gaslighting, the overheard conversation about the nursing home. Robert listened, his face darkening with anger. "We can get a restraining order, Jimmy. Evict them." "Tonight." "No," Jimmy said. "If I evict them, they leave with nothing, but they learn nothing. Mark will just find another victim. And Sarah, they'll poison her against me forever. They'll say I'm crazy and threw them out on the street." "So, what's the play?" "I need them to think they've won," Jimmy said. "I need them to sign their names to it. I need the trap to snap shut only after they think they're safe." Jimmy unrolled the papers from his cane. "The house," Jimmy said. "They want to sell it. They need my power of attorney to do it fast." "If you give them POA, they can drain your accounts," Robert warned. "Not if the accounts are empty," Jimmy said. Robert raised an eyebrow. "I want to transfer everything," Jimmy said. "The liquid savings, the investment portfolio, all of it. Move it into the Sarah Sterling Irrevocable Trust. You're the trustee. I have zero access. Mark has zero access." "Don't!" Robert said, typing furiously. "But the house, that's the big ticket item. If they sell it—" "Let them sell it," Jimmy said. Robert stopped typing. "Jimmy, that house is worth $2 million. You want them to have that. Look at the deed, Robert. Look at the clause we added in 1998 when Eleanor got sick." Robert picked up the yellowed document. He adjusted his spectacles. He read the fine print on the second page. His eyes widened then. A slow, wicked grin spread across his face. The life estate provision, Robert chuckled. I forgot about this. Mark never reads the fine print, Jimmy said. He sees the big numbers. He sees the title. He never looks at the restrictions. So, Robert leaned back. If they sell the house, they sell the remainder interest, Jimmy finished. But I retain the right to live there until I die. And if the new owner wants me out, they have to buy out my life interest based on actuarial tables, which at your age and health, Robert calculated quickly, is worth about 60% of the property value, Jimmy said. But here is the kicker. I want you to draft a specific power of attorney, not a general one that allows them to sell the property, but explicitly states that all proceeds must be deposited into the seller's primary account. The account you're about to empty into Sarah's trust, Robert noted. Exactly, but I'll leave one account open, the one connected to the house bills, the one that is currently overdrawn because I forgot to pay the heating bill last month to sell the act. Jimmy, Robert said, shaking his head in admiration. This is cold. They wanted to put me in a state warehouse, Robert, Jimmy said, his voice dropping to a whisper. They wanted to drug me until I forgot my own name. Cold is the only temperature I have left. They spent the next hour drafting the documents, the specific power of attorney, the trust transfer, and one final document, a letter to Sarah, to be delivered only if something happened to Jimmy. When Jimmy left the office, the rain had started. He felt lighter. The gears were in motion. The trap was set. Now he just had to be the bait. The storm hit 2 days later. Thunder rattled the window panes of the old house, and the wind howled down the chimney like a trapped beast. The atmosphere inside was even more volatile. The 30-day timeline Brenda had mentioned was evidently too slow for their creditors. Mark had been pacing the living room all day, sweating, checking his phone every 5 minutes. Jimmy sat in his chair, a blanket over his knees. He looked frail. He had stopped shaving 3 days ago, and the white stubble made him look older, unkempt. Dad, Mark said, stopping in front of him. We need to talk. Is it about dinner? Jimmy asked vaguely. No, it's not about damn dinner, Mark snapped. He took a breath. Sorry. Look, Dad, Brenda and we found a solution for everything. And Brenda walked in, carrying a folder. She sat on the ottoman in front of Jimmy, invading his personal space. Jimmy, she said softly, do you remember the nice man who came to look at the roof yesterday? There had been no man. Jimmy nodded anyway. The man with the hat. Yes! Brenda lied effortlessly. He said the roof is collapsing. It's dangerous. And the foundation, Jimmy, the house is sinking. It's going to cost hundreds of thousands to fix. Oh my? Jimmy put a hand to his mouth. I don't have that kind of money. We know, Mark said, kneeling beside him. That's why we have to act fast. We found a buyer. A developer. He's willing to buy the house as is. He'll deal with the roof. He'll deal with the foundation, but he needs to close by Friday. A Friday. Jimmy blinked. But where will I go? Sunset Haven, Brenda said, squeezing his knee. We got you a spot. It's a miracle, really. A VIP suite opened up. But we have to pay the deposit tomorrow. I don't know, Jimmy stammered. It's all so fast, Mark said, his voice desperate. If we don't do this, the city will condemn the house. They'll kick you out, and you'll get nothing. You'll be homeless. Do you understand? Homeless? The fear tactic, crude but effective on the weak. I don't want to be homeless, Jimmy whispered. Then you need to sign this, Mark said, pulling a document from the folder. It was the power of attorney. Jimmy looked at it. It was a standard statutory form, likely downloaded from LegalZoom. It gave Mark and Brenda full financial control. If he signed this version, they won. They could bypass the life estate. They could drain the trust before it was fully funded. Jimmy's hand shook violently as he held the pen. He dropped it. I can't, Jimmy cried. My hands. I can't write. Just make an X, Brenda urged. Or scribble. We can have it notarized. No, Jimmy said, pulling back. I need my glasses. And the special pen. The one Eleanor gave me. Where are they? Mark asked, impatient. In the study, Jimmy said. In the top drawer. Mark groaned and ran to the study. This was the moment. While Brenda was distracted by a thunderclap that shook the house, Jimmy reached into his cardigan pocket. He had the specific power of attorney Robert had drafted, the one that limited their power solely to selling the house and directed funds to his account, while unknowingly preserving his life estate because the deed transfer hadn't happened yet. The documents looked identical. Same font, same header. Mark ran back in with the pen. Here, Mark said. Jimmy fumbled with the papers on his lap. He dropped the blanket. He dropped the folder. Oh, clumsy me, he muttered. Mark and Brenda reached down to help him. In the flurry of movement, Jimmy performed the sleight of hand he had practiced 1,000 times with watch gears. He swapped the documents. He placed Robert's document on the clipboard. "Okay," Jimmy said, his breathing heavy. "Okay, I trust you, Mark. You're my son." And Mark's face softened for a fraction of a second, a tiny hesitation of conscience, before greed crushed it. "I am, Dad. I'm saving you." Jimmy put the pen to the paper. He didn't make an X. He focused. He stilled his tremor for 3 seconds. He signed his name, James E. Sterling. "Doan," Jimmy exhaled, letting the pen roll away. Mark snatched the paper. He didn't read it. He just checked for the signature. He looked at Brenda and nodded. His eyes were wild with triumph. "You did the right thing." "Jimmy," Brenda said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. She picked up her phone. She was already texting someone, likely the investors. "I'm tired," Jimmy said. "Can I go to sleep now?" "Yeah, Dad," Mark said, staring at the paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Go to sleep. We'll handle everything from here." Jimmy stood up and walked to the stairs. He climbed them slowly, listening to the whispers of celebration erupting in the living room below. "2 million! Mark hissed! We did it!" "Call the realtor," Brenda commanded. "Tell him to list it tomorrow. Investor special, cash only. Quick close." Jimmy reached the top of the stairs. He paused by the grandfather clock. He placed his hand on the wood, feeling the vibration of the pendulum. Tick-tock. They thought they had just signed a deal for a fortune. In reality, they had just signed a confession, authorized a sale that would yield them $0, and initiated a legal process that would expose their debts to the IRS. Jimmy smiled. It was a sad smile, but a strong one. "Phase 2 complete," he whispered. Friday arrived under a blanket of gray, suffocating clouds. The air was heavy with humidity, the kind that made joints ache and tempers short. For Mark and Brenda, it was payday. For Jimmy, it was D-Day. "Come on, Dad." Chop, chop. Mark clapped his hands, standing at the bottom of the stairs. "The movers are here for the furniture. We need to get you settled before lunch." Jimmy descended the stairs one by one. He carried no suitcase, just 2 black garbage bags Mark had given him. Inside were his clothes, his toothbrush, and the framed photo of Eleanor. 2 bags. Brenda sneered, checking her watch. "Well, I guess you don't need much where you're going. They provide gowns, don't they?" "I am ready," Jimmy said softly. He walked out the front door. He didn't look back at the house. He didn't look at the hydrangeas Eleanor had planted. He knew that if he looked, he might break character. He climbed into the back seat of the rental SUV. The drive was silent. Mark drove fast, weaving through traffic with aggressive arrogance. Brenda was on her phone whispering about wire transfers and offshore accounts. They drove past the city center, past the suburbs, into the industrial district. The scenery changed from green lawns to concrete warehouses and chain-link fences. "Here we are," Mark announced, pulling up to a squat brick building. "Kiodiwi Facili Wi-Fi 4. There was no Sunset Haven sign, no smiling seniors playing chess, just a few people in wheelchairs sitting by the entrance, staring blankly at the parking lot, smoking cigarettes. Ideally, the place smelled of bleach. Realistically, it smelled of boiled cabbage and neglect. "It's rustic," Mark said, his voice faltering slightly as he saw the peeling paint. "But the staff are great. Salt of the earth." "Get out, Jimmy," Brenda said, opening the door. "We have a meeting to get to." They escorted him to the intake desk. A tired nurse behind plexiglass took the clipboard Mark handed her. "Sterling," she chewed her gum. "Yeah, we got the transfer from social services. Bed 42B. It's in the hallway until a room opens up." "Perfect," Brenda said. She turned to Jimmy. She didn't hug him. She didn't even touch him. "Be good, Jimmy. Don't cause trouble. We'll visit when we can." The Mark looked at his father. For a second, the weight of his betrayal seemed to land on him. He looked at the frail old man holding 2 garbage bags in a sterile, hostile lobby. "It's for your safety, Dad." Mark lied to himself. "You'll see." "Goodbye, Mark," Jimmy said. He didn't say, "I love you." He just nodded. Mark turned and walked away. The automatic doors slid shut. Jimmy watched them get into the SUV and speed off, tires screeching, racing toward the bank to collect the proceeds of the house sale that had closed an hour ago. Jimmy stood there for a full minute. The nurse looked up. "You need help with those bags, honey?" she asked, her voice surprisingly kind. "No, thank you," Jimmy said. He stood up straighter. The tremor in his hand vanished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, modern smartphone, not the jitterbug phone Mark allowed him to have. He dialed a number. "Robert, they're gone. I'm around the corner." Robert's voice came through crisp and reassuring. "ETA 2 minutes. Don't get comfortable." The bank 30 minutes later, Mark and Brenda burst into the main branch of City National like they owned it. They were high on adrenaline. The notification had popped up on Brenda's phone IRS ID 2000 noted. We need to see a manager, Mark told the teller, slamming his hand on the counter. We need to authorize an international transfer immediately. They were ushered into a glass-walled office. Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, sat behind a desk. He looked tired. Mr. Sterling, Henderson said. How can I help you? We're moving funds, Mark said, grinning. From the James Sterling account, I have power of attorney. Here, he slid the stamped document across the desk. Henderson picked it up. He adjusted his glasses. He read it. Then he read it again. He looked at his computer screen. I see the deposit from the house sale, Henderson said. 2.1 million. Exactly, Brenda said, her leg bouncing. Send it to this account in the Caymans. Now, I can't do that, Henderson said calmly. Excuse me. Mark stood up. I have power of attorney. You have a specific power of attorney, Henderson corrected. I suggest you read Clause 4, Section B. Mark snatched the paper. He scanned it frantically. Authority granted herein is strictly limited to the execution of real estate documents and the collection of proceeds. Said proceeds must be deposited directly into the principal's primary savings account. This instrument grants the agent no authority to withdraw, transfer, or encumber funds from said account once deposited. What does that mean? Mark's voice squeaked. It means you were authorized to sell the house and put the money in the bank, Henderson said. But you are not authorized to take it out. Only James Sterling can do that. But he's incompetent, Brenda shrieked. He's in a home? Our records show Mr. Sterling was in this branch 3 days ago, Henderson said coldly. He appeared perfectly competent when he set up two-factor authentication for all transfers. Unless you have his thumbprint and his voice code, this money isn't moving. You don't understand. Mark was sweating him out of debts. People are waiting for this money. That sounds like a personal problem, Henderson said, standing up. No. Please leave, or I will call security. Mark and Brenda stumbled out of the bank, the sunlight blinding them. The house! Brenda gasped, clutching Mark's arm. We sold the house! The buyer paid cash! If we can't get the money, we can at least get the commission back from the realtor. Or something. No, Mark said, his face draining of color. He was looking at his phone. I just got an email from the buyer's lawyer. What does it say? Mark read it, his hands shaking so hard he nearly dropped the phone. Dear Mr. Sterling, it has come to our attention that the property title is encumbered by a life estate reserved by James Sterling. You failed to disclose this during the sale. This constitutes fraud. We are suing for immediate rescission of the contract and damages. Furthermore, since Mr. Sterling holds a life estate, he has the exclusive right to possession of the property. You are hereby ordered to vacate any personal belongings immediately. Brenda screamed. He signed the deed! He signed the transfer. Mark whispered, realization crashing down on him like a falling safe. But the deed he had, the one we never rid, it kept a life interest for him. We sold a house that comes with a tenant. Who is the tenant? Him. Mark looked at her, his eyes hollow. Dad, he still owns the right to live there. We sold the walls, but he owns the time. The taxi ride back to Elm Street was the longest of Mark's life. His phone was blowing up. The investors, loan sharks with short tempers, were calling. He sent them to voicemail. When the taxi pulled up to the house, Mark expected to see it empty, maybe boarded up. Instead, he saw a Blacktown car in the driveway, and he saw the front door open. Standing on the porch was not a frail, confused old man. Standing there was Jimmy. He was wearing his best three-piece suit. He was leaning on his silver-handled cane. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. And standing next to him, holding his arm, was Sarah. Mark stumbled out of the taxi. Brenda stayed inside, too terrified to face the music. Dade, Mark croaked. Sarah, what are you doing here? Sarah stepped forward. She was 21, studying architecture, and she had her grandfather's eyes, piercing and unforgiving. I'm here because Grandpa called me. Sarah said, her voice like ice. He told me everything. How you lied about him being sick. How you lied about me being busy. How you tried to steal everything he built. It was a misunderstanding, Mark stammered, walking up the path. We were trying to help. The house was falling apart. The house is fine. Jimmy spoke up. His voice was strong, no tremor, no hesitation. The only thing rotting in this foundation was you, Mark. Dade, please. Mark fell to his knees on the grass. You have the money. $2 million. Please.
I owe people.
Bad people. They'll kill me. Jimmy looked down at his son. He didn't feel joy. He felt a profound, heavy sadness. But he was a watchmaker. He knew that a broken gear that couldn't be repaired had to be removed, or it would destroy the whole mechanism. I know, Jimmy said. That's why I transferred the money. Mark's head snapped up. Hope flared in his eyes. You sent it to me. No, Jimmy said. I transferred it to the Sarah Sterling Irrevocable Trust. It's locked up tight and I can touch it now. It will pay for her tuition, her first home, and her future. But what about me? Mark wept. You have your health? Jimmy said, echoing the words Mark had used on him at dinner. And you have your memories. A police cruiser turned the corner, lights flashing silently. Brenda called them, right? Mark asked, looking around wildly. To help us. No. Robert the lawyer stepped out from the hallway behind Jimmy. I called them. Fraud is a felony, Mark. Elder abuse is a felony. And attempting to sell a property without disclosing a life estate. That's fraud again. The officers walked up the driveway. Mark Sterling. The officer asked. Mark looked at his father one last time. He looked for the confused old man he thought he could manipulate. He didn't find him. He found the master watchmaker, the man who had patiently, silently, dismantled Mark's entire scheme without lifting a finger in anger. Dad, Mark whispered. Jimmy turned his back. He took Sarah's arm. Come inside, Sarah, Jimmy said. I have a Brigate pocket watch on the bench. The hairspring is bent. I need your young eyes to help me fix it. Okay, Grandpa, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. They walked into the house. The heavy oak door closed with a solid, final thud. Outside, the handcuffs clicked. Inside, the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed. Bong, bong, bong. 6 o'clock. Time for tea. The house was quiet. The wolves were gone, and the timekeeper was finally perfectly at peace. More or less, son, wow. Just wow. Talk about a masterclass in patience. So let's break this down. What Jimmy did here is a psychological tactic called the Grey Rock Method, but with a nuclear twist. When dealing with narcissists like Mark and Brenda, fighting back with anger never works. It just gives them fuel. Jimmy realized that. He made himself boring. He made himself look weak as Grey Rock. And he let them underestimate him. Mark and Brenda suffered from what we call projection. They saw Jimmy as useless because they were useless without his money. They thought he was losing his mind, but in reality, they were losing their morals. The brilliance of Jimmy's revenge wasn't that he attacked them. It's that he let them walk into their own trap. He gave them the pen. He let them sign the papers. He let them believe they won. As the ancient Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu said, all warfare is based on deception. Hence, when we are able to attack, we must seem unable. The moral of the story. Never mistake silence for weakness. The quietest people are often the ones thinking the loudest. And if you have elderly parents, remember, they spent a lifetime learning how the world works. Don't think you can outsmart them just because they walk a little slower. Question for you guys: if you were Jimmy, would you have given Mark a single dime to pay off the loan sharks? Or did he deserve to face the consequences alone? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and remember, karma has no deadline.